In this video, I'm going to show you how to use HTMX in a Flask app along with modern SQLAlchemy. So not like the old version of SQLAlchemy that you see in like most Flask videos or Flask tutorials. This is like an updated version of SQLAlchemy and that you should be using going forward. So I'll demonstrate how to use that version of SQLAlchemy along with HTMX in Flask. And I'll do that by creating this simple app that allows you to add a bunch of phone numbers. So if I put a phone number here, 555-354-1234, submit. I can submit it to the database. I can add phone numbers and just put random values in here. Submit. I can delete whatever needs to be done. So this is done all through Flask-HTMX. There are no page reloads here other than me clicking the reload button. But for the app itself, you don't need a reload. And then, like I said, I'm using Flask-SQLAlchemy to store everything in the database along with Flask-WTF to handle the forms. So if you're interested in learning how to do this in Flask, then watch this video. To begin, let me show you the code that I have. So I have a dunder init that just sets up my Flask app. I'm setting up the database connection and a secret key here. I have one extension, Flask-SQLAlchemy-Lite. I'm instantiating that here. I have one model called phone number. So I have an ID, a phone type, a country code, an area code, and a number that will be stored in the phone number table. Finally, I have routes.py, which will return this index.html, which just looks like this. So I'll show you what this actually looks like in the browser in a second. But first, I need to install all the dependencies for this. So I'll do pip install, and I need Flask, of course. I need Flask-SQLAlchemy-Lite, and I need Flask-WTF. So let's install those three. And then I'll export Flask app to be project, and I'll turn on debug mode. So debug equals 1, and then I can do Flask run. Now I can go here, and this is what the starting app looks like. So I can't do anything yet. Like these buttons don't work, but this is the starting look for the app. So because this deals with Flask-WTF and WT forms, I need to create a form first. So what I'll do is I will create a file called forms.py. And in this forms.py, I need to import some stuff first. So from Flask_WTF, I need to import Flask form. So that's the one class I'm going to inherit it from for my main form. And then from WT forms, I'm going to need some things. I need a string field because part of the phone number will be a string. And then another part will be an integer. So I need an integer field. I'll need a select field for the drop down. Hidden field so I can keep an ID available for each phone number so I can delete things properly later. And then I'll need form field so I can embed one form in another. I'll need a field list for a similar reason. And then finally, I just need a plain form because I'm going to create two forms. One is going to be the form that gets displayed, and the other is going to be a form that is included in that main form. And then finally, I'll import a validator. So from wtforms.validators, import data required. Okay, so that covers all the imports. So I'll start by creating the first class, and this will be the phone number form, and it inherits some form. So this form won't be used directly on the screen. Instead, it's going to be embedded in the second form that I create. So in this form, I want a few fields. So I want an ID field. I want a phone type field. I want a country code field. I want an area code field, and I want a number field. And that just corresponds to what we see here. So this drop down is the phone type. Then we have the country code, the area code here, and then finally the number. So for the ID, I'm going to make this a hidden field, and the name of the field will be ID. For the phone type, this will be a select field, and we'll call this phone type. And the choices for this field will be blank. So this will be like the select, the type of phone that this will be. And then we have mobile. So mobile. I want home. So home and then home. And I need to make sure that this is a tuple. After that, I want work. So work. I want fax, if anybody still uses that. So fax. And then finally, I'll have space for other. So other, and then other, like that. So the idea is the first part of the tuple represents the internal name, and then the second part of the tuple is what gets displayed. So the internal name will be lowercase, and then what gets displayed is going to be uppercase. So for country code, I want this to be an integer field. Sometimes you have the pluses in the country code, but to keep this simple, I'll just use an integer. So we'll call this country code. And then for the validators, we'll say data required. And I just remember I want to put this on the phone type. So let's put this on the phone type as well. Just like that. This line's getting a bit long, but I'll leave it like that. Okay. And then for the area code, we can make that an integer as well. So integer field, and we can say area code, and then validators will be the same. So data required. I'll just copy and paste that in there. Then finally for the number, I'll make this a string field so you can include the dashes. So string field and then number, and then also it will be required. So this is the main embedded form that I want, but the form that I'm going to display is going to be called phone numbers form, because the idea is I want to support multiple phone numbers, not just one. So if I just wanted one phone number, then this form by itself would be fine. And then I can make this the Flask form. But because I want multiple phone numbers, I will make this a Flask form. And then I'll put phone numbers here, and this will be a field list. So like a list of forms. It needs to pass in form field and then tell it which form that I'm going to use as a field. So phone number form. And then I can set like a min entries. So I'll say there's always going to be at least one entry. All right, so we have the form. So now let's go to routes.py and import that. So from.form, import phone numbers form, right? Plural. Okay. And then I'll instantiate the form inside of the routes. So phone numbers form, and I'll pass it to the template. So form equals form here. So now I need this to work inside of the template. So let's go to templates and index to see what we have here. So we have a form set up already in the HTML, but we don't want this form to be used. We want the fields to be generated from Flask-WTF instead of just being coded in the HTML like this. So what I'll do is I'll replace the fields with the WTF stuff. So it should be a loop under phone list. So phone list will have like each field, which will be a form. So we'll say for field in form.phone underscore numbers, and then I'll put the in for here. What I want to do is I want to create this same div, so div class phone group, but instead of phone 0 as the ID, I want the ID to be dynamic. So it's still going to be phone, but then the ID part will be field.form.id.data. So this is why I have the hidden field on the form, so I can just have a unique ID. So we'll close the div, and then inside of the div, I can put the fields. So field.phone underscore type, and then we want field and then country code. And I'll put a placeholder here. So placeholder for the country code will be just 1 for the US. The next field will be the area code field. So the placeholder for this will be, let's say 213. And then the final field will be the actual number field. And then the placeholder for this will be, let's say 555 1234. All right, so for each field, I still want to have a delete button, so I can put that in there. And then that should be it. So I can delete the placeholder form, the example with just 0, because that's going to be regenerated when I do this. So now let's take a look. And before I do, let me just fix this one error. This should be forms instead of form. And let's take a look. So it's exactly the same. And this is good because Flask-WTF is now generating this form instead of it just being hard-coded in the HTML. So now let's go back and let's work on saving something from the form. So here in routes.py, what I need to do is I need to import some stuff. So from .extensions, I want to import DB because I'm going to be saving to the database. And then from models, import phone number because I'm going to be saving a phone number to the database. Next, what I want to do is I want to define a save route. So main routes and then /save. And this will take just post requests. and we'll call this save. So inside of the save route, the first thing I need to do is I need to instantiate the form in the same way. So I'll just copy this. So form equals phone numbers form. And because this is Flask-WTF, what I can do is if form.validate on submit, meaning they submitted the form and the form is valid, then the code underneath this will run. So what I want to do is I want to take each phone number that exists in the form and I want to save it to the database. So I can say for phone number in phone.phone_numbers. So this is going to be all the data for each phone number field. And then I want to save that phone number to the database. So I can start by creating a phone number object using the phone number model. And then I can just pass in the information from the form to the model. So the phone type will be phone_number, which comes from the form. So this phone number here as the current loop variable. And then it will be phone type dot data. And then it's a similar pattern for everything else. So phone number dot country code dot data. And then area code is phone number dot area code dot data. And then finally, just the number itself will be phone number dot data. Okay. So once I instantiate that, I can then add it to the database. So db.session.add the pin for the object for the new phone number, and then I can commit it. So db session commit. And I'll put the commit outside of the loop because I could potentially have multiple phone numbers be added. And then after adding a phone number to the database, what I want to do is I want to be able to return all of the phone numbers that exist and display them, right? So because this is using HTMX, HTMX is going to submit the save and then it needs some response. So I'll go ahead and create that. I need to select all the phone numbers from the database after saving. So I'll create a SQLAlchemy statement and this will be select phone number. And I need to import select. So from SQLAlchemy import select. And then I need to get all the phone numbers using this statement. So I can call the query. So we'll say phone numbers equals db.session.scalars and then pass in the statement and then get all the results. And then I want to pass this to a new form. So we'll say data equals, and then I want to pass in data for a bunch of phone numbers. So phone numbers like that. And then I can just pass the list of phone numbers here. And then instantiate the form again. So form equals phone numbers form, and then data equals data. So we're creating a new form. This should be singular. We're creating a new phone number form, but this time it has the existing numbers in it. Whereas before here, it's empty. And then we can return render templates. And then we want to return everything as a form, which will be replacing the existing form. So I'll put form.html here because I'm going to eventually replace this. So form equals form. So this form.html doesn't exist yet. It's going to be a subset of this that I'll just move around. So let me create that. So form.html. And what I want to do is I want to take the form all the way to the end here and just copy it and paste it into this form.html. So it's the exact same thing. And then I can go to the index and I can replace this with an include. So I can just do include form.html. So now we've separated out form.html and it's still included here. So because I'll be saving stuff to the database, let me go ahead and set up the database. So we have Flask shell here. And then what I want to do is I want to do from project.models import base. So my base class here for SQLAlchemy. And then I want to just create everything. So base metadata.create all, and then just pass in db.engine. And that should create the database file for me. So I can click it and we see I have the phone number table. Great. And then just a couple more things before I can test. So because I'm using Flask-WTF, I need to have the CSRF token inside of the form. So I'll go to form.html and then just under here, where the form begins, I'll put form.csrf token. So this token is generated automatically for me. And then also I want to put the HTMX on here. So I already have HTMX being loaded in the index. For the form, what I want to do is I want to call hxPost to save, and then I want to swap everything. So hxSwap and then outer HTML. So this is going to call save, and it's going to swap this entire form with a new form, which of course just renders from form.html. So it's going to immediately render the new form with the saved phone number. So let's go ahead and give this a shot. So let me load this, and I'll select a type. Let's say home phone number. Country code is 1. Area code is 645. And then the number is 555-9876. Okay, submit. And it looks like nothing happened after submitting. So let me try refreshing, and we see it's still here. And this is good because that means it's in the database. So if I go to my SQLite database here and just refresh, we see there is a row here for the phone numbers. So phone type is home, country code is 1, area code is 645, and then the number 555-9876. And looking down here, I noticed there was one error, so probably just not plural. So phone number form, this should be phone numbers form. All right, and then refreshing makes the form go away because now I'm using a different form. So I just need to make sure I use the data here in the index as well. So let's go to the index, and what I can do is I can select the phone number data and pass it to the template. So it's actually exactly the same as this here. And I'm going to replace this plain form with all of that. So we're selecting all the phone numbers and then creating the new form with that. So now if I refresh, I see the phone number appears here again. Okay, so now that we have the existing data, one thing I thought would be good to add would be just something to confirm that the form has been submitted. So what I want to do is I want to go to the form, and I'm going to add all this code here that I'm copying and pasting. And the idea is it's just going to show a toast, right? So I have a toast class inside of the index.html that says phone numbers updated successfully, and by default is being hidden. And what happens here is after settle, so after the request is finished, it's just going to add show toast, and that will make the toast appear, and then it's going to make it go away after 3 seconds. So that's all that long code is doing here. So let's go ahead and do that. So hit submit. Let me select, and now we see phone numbers updated successfully. All right, so now let me go over to save, and then one thing I need to do is I need to make sure that when I'm saving, I'm updating the existing numbers instead of just adding new numbers to the table, because I just want to have one. So we see when I saved again, it created a second one. So let me go back to routes, and then I can just copy and paste this code again to have the saved values already there. So it will update the database instead of adding new phone numbers. So if I refresh, I should have 2 numbers now because I have 2 rows in the database. And if I make this like 555 is the area code, hit submit and refresh, we see that it continues to add more fields. So because I had 2 before, it adds more. And if I save again, it's going to make it 8 instead of 4. So the reason why this is happening is because I'm only handling adding a new number here. So what I can do is I can add an if here. So I can say if phone number .form.id.data. So if there's an ID for the phone number, I want to do one thing. And then if it doesn't have an ID, that means it's new. So I just want to add it. So let me indent there. And then I can write the code to update one. So let's start by creating a statement, and let's select from phone number. So the phone number model. And then the where on this will be where the phone number.id equals phone number.form.id data. So we're getting the object associated with this. So we'll create a phone number object pin. and we'll say db session execute the statement, and it returns one scalar value. So dot scalar. And then I want to update all the values. So pn.countrycode equals phone number dot countrycode dot data. And then it's the same for everything else. I should actually have a phone type here that goes first. So phone number dot phone type dot data, and let's just put this above to keep it consistent. We have an area code, phone number dot area code dot data, and then finally the number. So phone number dot data, and this should be area underscore code. Okay, so now it should update properly, and then by calling commit after updating these things, it should change the value in the database. So let's load the page again, and then let's make this like a fax number, and then 456 as the area code. Submit, updated successfully. Let's refresh, and then we see it's just 456. If we change this one to 999 and then 123-4567, save that, refresh, we see that it's not adding more fields anymore. It's just updating the ones there. So if I go in the database and refresh here, we see that the numbers are being updated properly and the phone type and everything like that. So we're able to add phone numbers when we don't have any phone numbers in the database, but because we have phone numbers, I want to be able to add a new one. So if I need a fifth number, I want to be able to add that. So I need to set this up. I need to set up a route that returns some HTML so HTMX can work. So we'll do main routes and then add phone number is the name of the function. And then I want to grab all the phone numbers. So in fact, this is going to be the same code as here. So let's just copy that. And we're creating the form. And the only difference here before I return the template is I want to add in another blank entry. So I can take the form and then I can do phone numbers dot append underscore entry, just like that. And now I can return the template. So render template form.html and pass in the form like that. And then I can go to the template. So this will be index.html. And then we have this add button, this add phone number button. And I want to call hxget anytime the user presses this. So hxget, and we're going to call this add phone number route that we just created. And then the target for this, so the area where the HTML is going to be updated is going to be the phone number form. So I already have an ID on the form, this phone number form. And I just want to swap out the entire form. So hx swap, this will be outer HTML. Okay, so let's see if that works. Let's reload the page, hit add phone number, and now we see that a new field has popped up. My toe still appears every time something happens, but that's okay. And then I'll make that work. Country code 1, area code 876, and then 987-4567. Submit, and same thing, just refreshing. We see that this number has been added to the database here. And we know that the add works just fine. So the last thing we need to do is get these delete buttons to work. So right now, if I click these, nothing happens. So let me go over to routes and I'll create a new route called delete. So main routes delete, and this is going to delete a specific phone number. So each phone number has an ID. So integer ID. And then the methods for this will just be delete. We can also have get as well, but delete is the main method that you would use. And then delete is going to take in an ID, which will be none by default. So I can check it here. So if ID, I will do something. And what I want to do is I want to query for the phone number first and then delete it. So the querying for the phone number is going to be just like when I added it here. So this code here. So we can put that under if ID. And the only difference is instead of using phone number.form.id.data, I can just use the ID because I'll have direct access to this. And then I want to call db.session delete for that phone number, and then db session commit. And then I want to render the other phone numbers that are already there. So I'll just take this code. Actually, it's all of this code and add it because it's the same process. So I'm selecting the phone number, putting it in data, instantiating the form with it. I don't need to append entry. And then I'm returning the form. So let's go over to form.html and add the HTMX stuff for deleting. So we want to have something on the delete button. And I can say if form field ID data. So if there exists an ID for this field, I want to call hxDelete on the delete endpoint. And I need to pass in the ID, which is the same thing. So field.form.id.data. And then the target for this will be the phone number form. And then the hx swap will be outer HTML again. And then what I can say is else. So if it's not a form field that has an ID on it, I can just disable the button. So we'll put disabled here and then end if. So let's take a look. So loading the page, and let's add phone number here. So we see the delete button is not working here, but if I delete, let's say this other number, delete, we see there are only 4 numbers left. If I refresh, we have 4. If I delete again, we see that goes away. If I delete, 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 it all goes away. Refresh. If I look in the database and refresh here, everything is gone. And the last thing is I notice every time I call delete, it passes like all the parameters, and that's just the default behavior for HTMX. So if I don't want that to happen, I can go to the form again, and then just inside of here, like before the HTMX stuff or after, I can do HTMX params, none. So it doesn't pass all this extra information. So let's go ahead and try that really quick. I'll add a number and remove the letter, hit submit. Okay, so we see the one phone number has been added. The delete button is active. If I click it and then look here, we see the delete without all the extra stuff on it like before. And that's it for this example using Flask and HTMX, and also like the latest version of SQLAlchemy along with Flask-WTF. So if you're interested in learning more about any of these topics, I have other videos on my channel where you can learn those things.